Live from Efra, woohoo! All right.
Right, so excited.
Live from Efra.
What a blessing.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. We're continuing the learning of Zera Shimshon. May everyone who needs refuah, Geulah, Yeshua, may we all see it. May our chayalim be safe.
Amen.
And may we see all the Yeshuot that we need to see. Bezrat Hashem, things seem to be working in the right direction. For a lot of good things going on, so let's Bezrat Hashem continue it.
Amen.
We're learning Parshat Tazria, Drush Daled, that is Drush 4. I think we did this one last year, but just because we did it last year doesn't mean we can't do it again. So it's relatively short, but it's a nice idea. So we'll do this one. So it says Midrash Rabbah. This is Drush 4. In the art scroll, it's page 260. In this one, it's Drush 4 is on page is it Reish?
No,
Samech.
Samech, yeah.
Samech, Reish, on Samech, Daf Samech, which is 60. Those are the ones with the Nikudot and Mivuar. Okay, so it says Midrash Rabbah. The Midrash says, Al Pasuk Adam Ki Yeh Be'or B'Saro. In the beginning of this week's Parsha, it says that when a person has some sort of skin on his flesh, that is Or B'Saro means that it's going to be Neged Tzarat. Haggadah Dichtiv, the Midrash says Haggadah Dichtiv, this is what it means to say Nachonu la'litzim shvatim. He's saying is that their judgments are ready for the scoffers, meaning the people who are sinners, there will be judgments for them. Kevan sheni sham'u Yisrael parshat begaim nityaru. As soon as Bnei Israel heard about the whole idea of tzarat, they got scared. Amar le Moshe al tityaru. Moshe says to Bnei Israel, don't get scared. Elu be'umot ha'olam aval atem le'echol v'lishtot l'smach. Says this whole parsha Negaim is for the non-Jews, the rest of the world. You can eat and drink and be happy. That's the Midrash. So the Midrash is basically telling us that when Bnei Israel heard the whole idea, the whole concept of Mitzorah, the Tzarat, they got nervous, and Moshe says, and the Midrash says that this whole idea of Tzarat is for people who are make fun of or ridicule and sin. And so they're going to get the judgment. They're going to get this punishment. Bnei Israel get nervous about it, and Moshe tells them, "Don't worry, this isn't for you. This is for the rest of the world." So even though the Tzarat is in this parsha, we usually say Tzarat is for us. In this midrash, we're actually saying is that it's actually going to be a punishment intended for people who are not Jews. This is only on the midrash. It's not the pshat. The absolute pshat is that the Tzarat is absolutely 100% for Bnei Israel. Wow. But it's an interesting midrash. What's that?
Never heard that before.
Yeah, it's a Lashon Hara thing, right? But 100%. But the midrash here, it seems like it's totally opposite, meaning it's not for Jews at all. It's meant for non-Jews.
It's Chiddush. Never heard.
I never heard of that. So it's a midrash. It's not me, It's not the Zera Shimshon saying.
He finds them like Makuris.
Yeah,
it's a little bit discriminatory.
Yeah, in some ways, right. So now we have a question. So he says, "Makshim ma'in yan le'echol v'lishtot kan." Right, so he asked a lot of the commentators on the midrash say, why is it relevant? What's relevant for Bnei Israel to be eating and drinking? While it should be enough for Moshe to say that this is, he could have just said this is for for people who are Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and not for you. Why do you have to stick in the whole idea of eating and drinking? Right, that's one thing. What's the reason? Why were they so scared? Right. Are really, if we have to go back to the basic level, if the fact that they have something on their skin, is it really such a reason to be so scared? So he says, why? What's the connection in the midrash? Usually the midrash finds either a connection between the word or a topic, but here there's no connection really between the pasuk in the Torah in which the midrash is found and the pasuk that the midrash quotes. There's no real connection. So he has three questions. Three questions are, one is why did Bnei Israel have to, why does Moshe say eat and drink, and why is it okay for that to happen? Two is why are Bnei Israel scared of a skin disease, quote unquote, if you will. And third is, what's the connection of the psukim between the midrash, the pasuk in the midrash and the pasuk in our parsha? So he starts with the question, he starts with the pasuk, he starts with the last answer, the last question that he had.
Which page are you on?
We're on page, in the English, we're on page 260. Okay, so he says, ויש לומר, דקשיא עליה על הפסוק זה, שהיה לו לכתוב אדם אם יהיה, וכתב כי יהיה. דמשמע שמן הראוי הוא שיהיה להם נגעים, כמו שכתוב, נכונו לעצים שבטים, משום כי ירא, נתיירו, דמשמע שהם לעצים, ונכונו להם השבטים. So he says, we may answer the question, because the Midrash says that the question, in the pasuk it says, is Adam ki hiyeh. Ki hiyeh implies when a person, ki can be one of the ways that you can understand the word ki. It means when a person will have, right? And it doesn't say im yeh. If it doesn't say if a person gets it, it's rather saying ki means that it will happen. So if that's the case, so then because that it says that it will happen, meaning it's expected to happen, Bnei Israel, as it says, nachonu la'litzim shvatim, as it indeed written, judgments are ready for those people who make fun or sinners, right? That the Midrash implies that because basically he's saying is that the tzarat or the afflictions of the skin will happen, and therefore he says that because it will happen is because that it's a punishment that are ready for. It's meant to be inflicted on people who are sinners, and since the Midrash understood it to say is because the word ki means when it will happen as opposed to if it happens. Ki means when, and therefore it's one of the ways to understand the word ki. And so the Midrash said, well, if it means when, if the word ki means when in this context, therefore it means that it's already set up, meaning that it will be a time that it happens, and it's not if it happens or maybe there's a potential. And so he's saying is that indeed there will be. We already have the punishment ready for those people who are going to sin. And we should.
That basically implies that all non-Jews are sinners by default.
We haven't gotten to the non-Jewish part yet. He's just saying right now. He's saying
Adam is for sinners. He's saying by default they're sinners.
Right.
He hasn't defined Adam yet.
Right, he hasn't defined Adam yet, but he's saying is that there are sinners. Exactly. That's exactly what.
It's like you're already a sinner before you do anything.
Yeah, that's
Doesn't
a very.
that sound a bit Yoshkin? No.
It does. I was going to
That's
say something like that because basically he was saying the same thing. You're saying is that basically you're setting yourself up for failure, and basically.
I mean,
Proven guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
Yeah. We don't work that way.
Right. So that's exactly why Bnei Israel were scared. That's by the way. That's the Midrash says Bnei Israel were scared because they heard the word ki meaning if, or meaning when. So if they were understood, if you understand the word ki as is when, right? And if you understand when, that means Bnei Israel is saying is wait a minute, you're telling us that we're going to sin, and you already have the punishment set up for us. So then what are we doing here, right? Mishum ki hiyeh nityaru, because it says when a person will have skin on his flesh, meaning when it will have the tzarat, right? That's why they became scared. Exactly what he says. Demashma shehem leitzim, because it implies that they're once v'shanachonu lahem hashvatim, and that the punishments are ready to befall them, means that their realization that they were considered already sinners now, which is exactly what you're saying. Is that the whole point is that you're telling us that we're sinners before we even sin. In other words, right? It's set up. The punishment is ready. It's just waiting for the sinner, but the sinner is already there. It's just a matter for us to actually make the sin that's appropriate for this, the punishment that's appropriate for the crime that's appropriate for this punishment.
well, your point is not the sinner.
Right, but again, that's the question that he has. He doesn't understand why is it. Bnei Israel were scared because of exactly that reason. They said, "You're telling us that we're ready, that it's ready." Meaning, if it's already ready, then I have no chance, basically, of I have no chance to ever really do, to ever commit, to ever repent or anything like that, because you're telling me that the punishment is already there. When we call Shekin, and so he says how the fear of being considered a sinner is especially pertinent with regards to tzarat, and then we're going to go kind of work backwards. He says, Mikol Shekin, even more so, Shekatav Zohar Pasuk Adam Kiyeh Be'or B'Saro. The Zohar on Parshat Tazria says with regard to the pasuk that we just mentioned, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yossi, Have Azlu Be'archa, they were traveling. Ad Havo Azli, when they were going, Iaru B'Chad Barnash, they met an individual, V'Apoi Malyam Machtishin, and his face was covered with sores. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, V'Dai Chatahu, certainly he's a sinner. Di'ivlav Hachi Lo Shimu An Poi Be'ilein Marin Bishin. He said his face would never be covered with such a disease. V'ilein Lo Ikrun Yisurim De'ava, because the afflictions of love are not inflicted in such a manner. Meaning, the Gemara and Brachot, this is based on the Gemara and Brachot. The Gemara and Brachot says that afflictions of love, which are the idea that Hashem sometimes brings punishment or brings hardships to people who are really right. Right. So exactly. So he says that this is a phenomenon.
So it would be hidden, not on the
Right, exactly. Right, Yisurim Shalava should really be hidden. Something that's apparent in the face means that.
It's not Ba'ava.
Right, exactly. It's not Ba'ava, exactly. V'im Kain,
It's not what?
it's not, because Yisurim Shalava, like inflictions of love that Hashem does on people that He loves, He tries not to make them so apparent. He tries to make them less apparent, less obvious. But because they're so obvious that it's clear to these two people, the two Rabbanim, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Chia, who were traveling, he said clearly that this person must have been done something really wrong. Okay, that's the Zohar.
I once fell down the stairs in a Moses I worked at, and
You know what?
in an institution they had like stairs on the side of the institution, and they were all broken. And I fell down. Obviously, the Manal was like, "Don't sue us." Yeah. Anyway, I didn't, but I'm not guy. But I basically smashed my glasses onto my face. There's a nace, the glass didn't go into my eye. Went all around my eye. It made like a hay around my eye. It's really scary, and I had a patch. So I asked Rabbonim, like in Yerushalayim, I said, like, is this like it's like over my eye, like Shmir Sanayim? Like I didn't get my eye, but it got around. It's like a hay. It's like they were like Shmir Sanayim. Yeah.
Anyway, so he says here,
In the bathroom.
I think in either the bathroom or in the drawers there might be.
I'm not such a gabbai.
Yeah. V'im Kain, therefore he says, since this affliction is such a big sin, is put on display for the sinner, the people. That's another reason why the Bnei Israel got scared, because again, it's another tigaleh klonenu lakol, v'afilu chayot hasadeh yacholot az lishtot. He says basically Bnei Israel got scared. This is another reason why Bnei Israel got scared. They said is the skin disease, the tzarat, whatever we call it. There's no nap. Usually there's paper towels over there.
There's nothing.
No, nothing. Okay.
Bathroom.
Maybe in the bathroom there could be tissues. So he says that Bnei Israel got scared. A second reason, the first reason we said is that they're scared because we're kind of setting ourselves up for sin. Kind of before we even start sinning, we already are called sinners. Second one, as he's saying, is that this kind of tzarat, the skin disease, is a very much an apparent, obvious outside source, outside,
It's like a gouge. It's
right,
like
exactly.
indicator.
Right, you can't miss that. You're not going to miss that. He says, and the Zera Shimshon says,
LCD screen.
he's quoting it based on a Midrash Rabbah. He says is that even animals, even animals will have control over us, because not only we're viewed as Hashem by Hashem as sinners, but the whole world would see us because we have the disease, right? So he says, therefore, this becomes, we can understand Moshe's response. He says, this is why Moshe says, Mishum hachi amar lehem af al pi shebe'olam hazeh eino noheg din negaim ba'umot mikom makom katav kra al shem ha'atid. So he said, this is why Moshe said to them, this indeed, when we read usually when we read Tzaraat, we'll talk about Tzaraat, we're talking about the law of getting apart, not relevant to the other nations. Mikom makom katav kra al shem ha'atid. The Torah is actually talking to us about the future, what's going to happen in the future. Atidim halmot lekot b'negaim v'itgaleh klonam aval Yisrael echol v'ishtot v'yismach. So he says is that in the future, all the nations of the world, he says, Zera Shimshon says, the idolatrous nations of the world will be inflicted with skin disease, right? And their disgrace will become obvious, right? Aval Yisrael echol v'ishtot v'yismach. But the Jewish people will eat, drink, and rejoice. Meaning, what Moshe is telling him he's comforting them, and he's saying to them that even though that right now, indeed, Tzaraat is for people who are sinners, but you shouldn't be scared. In fact, you should be eating and drinking. Meaning, in the future, at the time when Mashiach comes, or when time of the Geulah,
For us, it will be hidden. For
them, it will be
open,
obvious.
so
Exactly.
we can drink.
And we can drink. Exactly. That's exactly right. The Jewish people, though, will not be affected, because we're going to be we're on page Daf. In that set, we're on Daf Samech. Samech, Drush Dalet. We're in the middle of Drush Dalet.
We just went Samach Aleph.
Right, just Daf Samech Aleph. Right, okay. So what we started, basically the Midrash, I'll go quickly back over, like as Charles likes to do. The Midrash quotes Adam Ki Abasaro, one of the first Psukim of this week's Parsha, and the Midrash says that there are Nachonu Le'elitzim Shvatim, meaning that there will be judgments for those people who are idolatrous or who are sinners. And Bnei Israel got scared. The Midrash says that Bnei Israel got scared. Moshe says to them, "Don't worry, it's not for you. These are for the nations of the rest of the world, and you can eat and drink and be merry." So the question is, how could it be that what are we doing, eating and drinking? Well, Bnei Israel, why should Moshe say that we should be eating and drinking while this is happening? And how is it possible? What's the connection between the two psukim? that the Midrash brought, and also what is the whole idea of them being fearful? Why are they scared? Why is Bnei Israel scared? So the answer we said is that Bnei Israel were scared because it says Adam ki yeh. When the Torah says ki yeh, it means that when it will happen. Basically, it sounds to Bnei Israel, at least they heard, that it means that they're already it's set up that they're gonna that's setting themselves up for failure, meaning that they don't really have an option to do tshuva because they're already considered sinners. And based on a Zohar that he brings, it says that Adam ki yeh b'saro. The Zohar says about a story about Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yossi, that they were traveling. They saw someone with skin afflictions, and he said the skin afflictions are obviously a sign, an external sign, which is a very strong sign of sin. Because usually when someone gets Yisurim Shalavav, gets love, afflictions of love, or Hashem gives them afflictions of love, they're usually internal, things that are less obvious. The obvious sins must be so bad. So Bnei Israel got scared, and the answer that the Zera Shimshon gives is that Moshe was telling them that this is the parsha. The pshat level is that the parsha really is talking about people who are sinners of lashon hara. But the Drush level, or what the deeper level, is that this is really talking about the future. The time of Mashiach, when Bnei Israel will, Moshe is telling them, now, in the time of Mashiach, or the time in the future, the rest of the world will be afflicted with an external disease, and that the real sins, the real sinners will become obvious, and the Bnei Israel will be able to drink and be happy because they're not the ones afflicted, they're actually going to be the ones who Hashem, they're going to be so close to Hashem. So, now he says, now he explains the relevance of the Jewish people eating and drinking to their avoidance of leprosy, avoidance of sarat. Damrinan, now he says like this. Damrinan b'ktubot perek afalpi, and the perek in ktubot, which is on daf samech aleph, it says, which is interesting that we're on daf samech aleph in the Sefer right now. Right. Ktubot daf samech aleph. It says here, Amemar marzucham Rav Ashi havu yatve apitcha deve izgur malka. So Ameimar, Marzucha, and Rav Ashi were sitting once at the entrance to King Igzur, the Izgur's palace. Chalif Azil Atur Ragna de Malka. The king's steward passed by carrying the king's food. Chazi Rav Ashi the Marzucha the Chavar Ape. Rav Ashi saw that Marzutra's face became pale from the sudden craving that he had for food. Shakal Betzbate Anachli de Pume. So he took some of the food with his finger and placed it into Marzutra's mouth to kind of revive him. Right? Upon being questioned by the palace guards why he would ruin the king's food, right? That's a chutzpah for two rabbanim, one rav to take food out of the king's food.
I can see Jews doing that.
We're going to get to that in our Haggadah Torah. We're going to get to that. Actually, it's very interesting that you said.
I'm not saying bad about us.
No. It's actually.
If we want to get something done, like a mitzvah saving someone's life. Like, who cares what the king says?
So exactly. Well, actually, it's very similar to what we're going to talk about in the Haggadah. So I'll mention that later. So he says, I saw, Rav Ashi says, the Gemara says that Rav Ashi saw that he saw some leprous swine, meaning chazir, right, in the dish. Rav Ashi then stuck his finger into a piece of meat and miraculously revealed it to be leprous. Amrulei, my time is samachta nisa. Why is it that you relied on a miracle and claimed the meat was had sarat? Amar lahu. Chazai ruach tzarat kaparach ilave. I noticed a spirit of tzarat sprouting on it. Rashi says ilave de Marzutra. He explains that it was upon Marzutra that Rashi saw some sort of tzarat. Ad kan l'shano. Apparently, he says that this is what he's saying is that the tzarat can appear upon someone who has unsatisfied craving for food, which is interesting. This will be the impetus in the future for the other nations who be inflicted with meaning because the nations of the world have a very strong taiva for food, and that's one of the ways that you can see tzarat apparently has like this. One of the ways we know tzarat for lashon hara, but apparently tzarat, which and in a different Torah, the Zera Shimshon mentions that there's two kinds of tzarat. The tzarat that we know of, which is like the lashon hara tzarat, and the other kind of tzarat, which is one based on people what kind of foods that you eat. I think he mentions it here also a little bit, but he mentions there in a different Torah. He mentions it like in depth.
That makes sense because Goyim they have an insatiable desire for
exactly. That's what he's talking about.
For chazer and
right.
shrimps and calamari.
He mentions it. I don't know.
If like non-kosher is a lot more desirable.
Oh yeah, he mentions it here at the end. We're going to get to it in a second. He says like this. Very good. He says like this. He says, "It says in the Navi that says Hashem says, my servants will eat and you will starve. Meaning Hashem, it will tell my servants that Bnei Israel will rejoice, and you will be ashamed. You, meaning he's telling Jewish people to eat and drink and rejoice, and the other nations will not be able to partake. Those people who see, as we see in the incident with the Marizutra, which is what we just quoted, one who sees food and does not partake in it, he's at risk of having tzarat. So he's saying a person who you have no reason to become to be nervous to get tzarat, because if you don't have the tiver for certain kinds of food. So what you should be able to do is what's the refuah for the makkah, the potential makkah, to eat and enjoy the food that you have, but not be nervous about don't have the taiva for other kinds of food. So what he explains.
So the Torah comes from
a taiva for food.
Just taiva, not the actual eating.
Right, exactly. So, but the Zera Shimshon is going to use that to the positive side.
Just eat.
What he's saying is that the food that we eat, that Jews eat, is basically a protection for us. Because what do? We have a taiva. We may have a taiva for food, and we usually learn that taiva for food is bad. But he's saying is that the food that we eat is on a different level. And he's saying that the food that we eat, even though we might overindulge or whatever it is, the food that we eat is on a higher level, and therefore we have less of the taiva, even though it's considered taiva. We're not as bad as like you said, the non-Jews who have like this insatiable thing. So he says,
are you eating to learn, or are you learning to eat?
Exactly. So he says here, when Moshe said to them about Negaim, about the Tzarat, he's talking about the rest of the world, and now he says, this is a second approach. The approach one was that this whole idea of the Negaim and Tzarat was talking about the future. Right now, Bnei Yisrael, in the Pshat level, let's look at it that way. The Pshat level is that Tzarat is inflicted to Jews, and has nothing to do with non-Jews. That's what we know of the Parsha. Most of the time, that's what we learn. The Zera Shimshon says that this midrash is based on the idea that Tzarat is actually for those people who are sinners, and in the future, Bnei Israel will be the ones eating and rejoicing, while the non-Jews will be the ones who will be with obvious signs of Tzarat, for not only for what they're eating, but for the actual sins that they committed. Now he's going to give another approach, which is similar, but not exactly the same. And it focuses mostly on why Moshe made a point of the Jewish people eating and drinking, and this is going to get to what we talked about just now. It says, it's true that Ma'iri dekra'afal be'olam hazeh. Like we said, the Torah refers to Tzarat in this world. There are certainly things that come to us, skin afflictions that we all know about, whether we call it leprosy or whatever we're calling it these days. Right? He says there are definitely going to be skin afflictions that we have. Those people who eat crawling creatures and bugs, shkatzim, right, are those people. That's the Gemara says it. We learn in a different Drush, number 5. That's the one I was talking about. And these skin afflictions will come specifically to non-Jews who eat all these creepy crawlers and all these things. And that's why Moshe says to them, when a person will have the skin afflictions, which implies that the skin afflictions will occur. Omnam Yisrael, Sheinam ochlim shkatzim u'rumasim, who do not eat insects, like I told you, you can continue to eat all their usual foods without fear, concern, and again. He says, don't worry about it. You have nothing to fear. So Moshe is basically saying it's not for you. The Negaim are for skin diseases, yes. But because you have nothing, because there's 2 ways to get tzara, we mentioned. One is Lashon Hara, and the other one is to eat the food that's not appropriate for us, for Jews. So you can continue eating. You can continue eating and rejoicing. You have nothing to worry about. See, even though Bnei Israel said we're scared, because when they heard the Parshat again, they're scared. He says, no, don't be nervous, because you're eating the food that's okay. The kosher food that you eat is fine. And instead of getting nervous, you should be eating and rejoicing and enjoying, continuing to rejoicing. That's the chiddush here. So, because like he says, Shebaim Achmat is a chid prati, right? He says that there is he says. So then the question, what's the one question we didn't answer? Why is the Parshat again mentioned at all to the Jewish people? Right? Because if the skin afflictions actually come, if Tzarat indeed comes, it seems like it's mostly coming to non-Jews, and then why are we talking about it at all? So there's Zera Shimshon, since there is still another form of a Tzarat, Shebaim Echmat is a chid prati, that come from a certain kind of personal sin, right? Meaning he says here, right? The Zera Shimshon mentions it based on a Gemara in Arachin. He says that yes, indeed, the non-Jews will indeed be punished for their afflictions with tzarat in the future. Bnei Israel will be inflicted with tzarat nowadays for a certain kind of sins. So he says is, Mishum hachi nitan din hanegayim Yisrael lo l'umot. It's because of this, because the law of the tzarat were given to the Jewish people, not to the other nations, kadesh yitchapru b'hem, so that they may earn atonement, meaning that they do tshuva, im yasu masha katuv parsha, if they perform the laws that were mentioned in this week's parsha, kedamrin b'per kama de brachot, as it says in brachot 5, in adaf hey amud bet, the negaim havu mizbeach kapara. He says that the tzarat and negaim, all the different kinds of negaim, are like an altar, like a mizbech of kapara, meaning that they're given to become what? A vehicle for tshuva, for the Jewish people. And that is exactly similar to the story that was mentioned in the Zohar. He says if we look at the story there, that the person who was inflicted with tzarat, it was basically to give us, it was for him to be kaper on his sins. So therefore, we have two things. The word while we heard the word ki yebisaro, right? Adam ki yebisaro, and while the word when implies that the topic of negaim are expected as a punishment of the midrash, as we said, it refers to the other nations. The actual laws of negaim are intended for the Jewish people. The actual laws of tzarat and other negaim are intended for the Jewish people because the tzarat and the other afflictions are not viewed only as a punishment, but they're also a way for a person to achieve his tshuva by following the laws outlined in what the parsha says of how do we identify it, how do we get ourselves, we close ourselves off, we step aside, whatever it is. So that's Torah number 1. Just an interesting thing. You were talking about Shmir and Einayim.
Torah number 4.
Right, it's Torah number 4, right? So Torah. So interestingly, I heard the Bat Ayin mentions it. He mentions what's the difference between oneg and nega. The only difference is where the ayin is.
Oh, the eyes.
The eyes. He says when you look at things one way, you can have oneg.
It's all about perception.
When you look at things one way, you can look at it oneg. When you look at things the other way, you put the eye at the end. When you put your eyes at the end, meaning the things that are not supposed to be, then you get nega. You get negaim. Anyway.
Wow.
Okay. Anyway, so that's the parsha. That's Torah number 4. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll go to something on. We do another. We'll do the Haggadah Shal Pesach. So in case someone else wants to, we'll do that one. We're going to do Haggadah Shal Pesach. Let me just get the right one. Shemot. I don't know which one you want. The Hebrew one. You want the Hebrew one? You want the Hebrew one? This one. I'll tell you what page it is in a second. This one. It's a fascinating story and a fascinating shayla that almost no one asks. Let me just find it. Who did? Where is it? Okay, this is the English one of that. This is English. If you want that one, pass it around.
Where's this in Shmos?
Yeah, it's the Shemot. There's Shemot at the end of Shemot. No, at the end of Shemot, he has a whole section called. This is for Haggadah Shal Pesach. We're going to do something. So at the end of Sefer at the end of Sefer Shemot, the Zera Shimshon has a bunch of drushim on the Haggadah. I actually was speaking to Rabbi Zilberberg today about the idea of taking this and turning it into its own individual section. It's there. It's at the end. It's at the end. No, so it says Haggadah Shal Pesach at the end. Yeah, right, exactly. So it says here in the English one, it's on page 600 and I'll tell you which page it is. It's on
611, 612.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second here. I'm just going to get here.
615.
Let me just see which. Hold on. Let's see, where is it? Let's see. Hold on. Okay. Here. Okay, so it's Drush number 1, but we're not going to go the whole thing. We're actually going to learn
615.
right, but we're actually going to go to page 630. It's in the middle of the Drush. He actually in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, similar to the other ways and one that we just learned about Tazria, he gives alternative options to different questions. One of the questions that he mentions is why is matzah, if we want matzah to be, he asks this question about matzah. The main question he asks about matzah in general is about the whole idea of why do we have to eat it. Why are we remembering something that was done in so fast, right? It doesn't make sense. So the Zera Shimshon asked that question, basically saying is that we have to make. Let me see here. His question is his original question. 1 second here. There we go. So original question is right. Why do we? Why the original question of this drush is why do we eat this matzah? And what do we know? We say because we didn't have time to make the bread properly, right? So he says, he says we have a question. He says, I don't understand. Weren't they? It says you should eat. Were they not already commanded to eat matzah before? As it says, Shivat Yamim Matzot. Okay, it means you should eat for a 7-day period. That commandment of eating matzah was told to them before the fact that they ran away. We're doing a quick Haggadah Shal Pesach piece. We just do a nice little piece on Haggadah Shal Pesach. It's Drush Aleph and Haggadah Shal Pesach in Shemot. At the end of Sefer Shemot.
Which one are we doing?
Aleph. We're just going through the Drush. So in the middle of the Drush of Aleph, which is talking about matzah and the whole idea of running through matzah, he asks a wonderful question.
What page are you on?
It's going to be right. So it says here the question is in the English. It's on page 630. In the Shemot one, it starts. It's Drush Aleph and Haggadah Shal Pesach, but it starts where the words Vata with a Vav Ayin Taf Hey Atam Mevayer Atam. And now, right? Okay. So you see that? You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. You see that's a Drush Aleph, but it's like towards the middle of the Aleph. Okay, so now we have a wonderful question that he asks. The question is, we all say, Va'afilu chachamim, va'afilu nevonim, right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? He's asking the question, Vata, meveratam lamotian v'achazaka, she'ilu otian, okay, are anu v'anenu okay, and then he says, Va'afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu mitzvah lenusaper. And then he says, Yesh l'daktek, mai sal kadatach shachachamim v'anuvim yuptorim mitzvah zo. Simple question. He says, why would we even think that the chachamim, right? It says afilu chachamim means. Here's the Tesla. Yeah, we hear the Tesla outside. So he says here. He says, why could we ask the question? Why would we think that a person who's chacham would be patur from the mitzvah? Right? It says va'afilu, meaning even the chachamim have to say this mitzvah.
So without reading,
the
whole foundation of this is ki shalcha bimcha. Meaning, I would say that. I haven't read it.
Right.
But it's like saying, the guy doesn't know, so answer him. So maybe if he knows the answer, you don't have to.
Maybe you're not far away. Not far. Okay, so he quotes. So right. So he says here. So he says we have to suggest as follows. Right, because what's the whole point of the mitzvah is, like you said, the whole mitzvah is to l'saper sipur mitzvah mitzrayim. Mechmat she'ilu, because had we not taken us out, we all still be in Mitzrayim, right? Still be galut, right? There's room for the people of Chachamim to say that they should be exempt. They might reason, even if they were still in Egypt, the Chachamim might be free to do what? To do because of their Torah wisdom, we might think that because they're so smart, and I'm not getting into politics about why we might say that people are Torah learners and whatever. We won't get into that statement. So he quotes a wonderful statement, a wonderful Gemara that I have to be honest. When I heard the shiur today, it was the first time I ever heard this Gemara in my life. It was a fascinating Gemara. It's a great story. So he says like this. It's based on a Sanhedrin, Daf Perek Yud Aleph of Sanhedrin. Daf Kuf Daled 104. It says, "Maaseh b'shnei bnei Adam shenishbu b'har Karmel, v'hayash shabai ma'alech acharem v'amar echad mehem lechaviro gamal." So he says basically what happens is I'll tell you outside because it's basically a long story. Basically, these two Jews are walking outside in the Carmel in the north, and some bandit comes and takes them and holds them down at gunpoint. Bandita, right? So he says, and he takes the bandit says, "That's it. You two Jews, you're coming with me." He ties them up, and as they're walking around, I'm telling it outside because it's a long story. And he says, as he's walking along, the two Jews start talking to each other. He say, "Hey," they're walking around. He says, "Hey, you see, there's a one-eyed camel." And he says, not only is there a one-eyed camel on one side of the camel, and the non-Jews looking around. He says, "I don't see anything." And the guys and the other one Jew says to the guy, even though they're tied up, one Jew says to the other one, not only is he one-eyed, he's blind in one eye. He's carrying on one side, he's carrying wine, and on the other side, he's carrying olive oil. And the non-Jew's looking around and can't find him. Can't see anything. He's like, "What are you talking about?" And he says, not only that, but on one side, there's a Jewish, like a driver, a camel driver, and on the other side is a non-Jewish camel driver. So now the non-Jewish, this bandit is like going nuts. He's like, "I don't see anything. I don't see anything for miles. I don't see anyone." He's like, so the Jews say, "Go look in the fields, and you'll find it." So he says, I know your trick. So he ties him to a tree. And he says, "You guys stay right here while I go look." Sure enough, a few minutes later, this is all in the Gemara, by the way. This is not me making it up. Sure enough, he finds it. He finds the camel.
Die.
Yeah.
Blown away.
Anyway, so he says, so the guy says, "How did you know?" So they say, he says, "Chachamim." He says, "We knew." How do we know? Because when you walk, a camel, he said, we saw on the road.
The dripping.
Yeah, he says on the road. First of all, he said on the road, on one side, the road, the grass was it was eaten, and on one side it wasn't. A camel would never do that. A camel would walk straight and eat from both sides. So clearly he's blind on one side. And then he says, the bandit says, "How would you know? How did you know oil and wine? Like who know?" He says, like you said, the drippings. On one side, the oil. What happens to the oil? It leaves like a little stain. On the other side, wine doesn't leave a stain. It just gets absorbed. Right? And how did you know Jew, non-Jew? He says, Jew, non-Jew. That's easy. Because a Jew, us Jews, we're commanded that when we have to go to the bathroom, we go outside into the field. We kind of step aside. Non-Jews, they do whatever they want. They just go whatever. He says, "I don't understand." He says, "You guys are chachamim. And because you're chachamim, I'm going to let you go. And not only am I going to let you go, I'm going to honor you with a meal in my own home." This is what the Ben said. This is what the Gemara says. Okay? So now the Zera Shimshon says, "V'chein," and he says, the Gemara, basically what he says there, after that whole thing, he says, Baruch, it says, "V'omer, Baruch ha'makom shebachar b'zaro shel Avraham v'natan lem b'chochmato, u'v'chol makom she'em olchim nasim sarim la'adoneim b'taram v'achul levatem l'shalom." Right, that's what the Gemara says. The Shema Minah Shemishu Chacham Koneh Charut BeChachmato. Meaning, he says, what? I'm free. The person who's smart, his own wisdom creates his freedom. Meaning, like I use my own. I create my wisdom. My wisdom allows me to kind of like outsmart the person or become successful. Or I recognize my own freedom. Give me a good example of that, without looking at the next page.
Tax evasion. Tax planning.
Right. No, I'm talking about examples.
That's a good one.
Right. You outsmart. Right. You're using the system.
You're using the system. You're within, but you're.
But that's
Right.
a clever CPA.
Right. Anyway, by the way, they say that accountant. I'm not an accountant, but they say accountants know all the codes. They know all the ways to outsmart the system, and so you just have to ask them. They'll tell you. If you tell them, they'll tell you. Anyway, but give me a story from the Gemara, from the Torah, of a person who used his wisdom to outsmart and get to where he needs to be. Yosef HaTzadik. Right? So look, that's the next paragraph. What does he say? V'chein matzinu b'Yosef, shamar lo paro ein mavom v'chacham hamocha. Ata tiyeh al gertim. Right. V'chein mish yodeh, ata Torah, ein lecha ben horin shelo el misho. So he says, what happened with Yosef? Yosef started the story in the bow, and he uses his wisdom and uses his connection to Hashem to outsmart, quote unquote, the system and rise to the ranks. So you would say what? And what do we know about the Torah says? Based on Pirkei Avot, it says, who is the person who's the most free? A person who is serving Hashem, serving Mishosek B'Torah, right? So he says, "Lachen kamash malan da'amagi she'afim chayvi." Even a person who is so smart, a person who's involved in Torah, and he's considered a ben chorin, right? You would say a person who's learning Torah all day is considered a ben chorin. He says, "Atam who shekol mishem merabel saper mitzvah Mitzrayim harei ze mishubach v'im shar nashim achar sheyatzu yadei chovatam kol zeh." He Imkain af elu hachachamim af shelefi datam im turim. Mikol makom lo gari mishar anashim lachar sheisimu chovatam. He says that even though you would think that a person who's smart and involves himself with Torah all day and he's considered a ben chorin, you would think that he's patur, right? Why? Because he knows the system, he knows the story, he knows it. He's so involved, he's so ben chorin already. You would think that no, he doesn't have to. So it's because everyone else is involved in the Torah, and everyone else during this time is kind of fulfilling their obligation. And since therefore they're by retelling the story, you would think you would say. So we have to say is that the chachamim are no different. Meaning, just because, yes, they may be considered ben chorim because they're involved themselves in Torah, he says they're not, that even though they may consider themselves pturim, even though they should not be worse than the average person who is encouraged to say what? To keep on telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Meaning, he's saying is that
after the average Joe did the initial telling,
right?
Then you've got the marbeh.
Right, exactly. So he's saying is that the idea here is that he says here. Yeah, so he says at the very least it's prayed that they too should be telling the story of Bnei Yetziat Mitzrayim too, because at the end of the day, it's not, they're not ben chorin. The only way they can become ben chorin, had to become ben chorin, because they're learning Torah. It only happened after Yetziat Mitzrayim. So that, yes, you think that maybe because they're so involved in Torah, they may be considered pturim. He says no. It's the obligation that we have is not only the person who's the average person who says Yetziat Mitzrayim, and therefore he tells the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, but even in addition to the Chachamim, who would otherwise might be considered Pturim, there too. Hi.
There's another challenge. Do you need it?
Not yet.
Not yet, maybe.
You want something?
No.
Where's Simon? Tell him to eat.
Simon was his friend.
Oh my God, tell him I'm offended. What's that?
If you need, there's
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry to bother.
Not bothering. Yes, exactly. Charut al-Chod. You would think that what's Charut? Charut, exactly. So that's number 2. That's the Torah number 2. It's a little piece within a bigger Torah, but that's a piece about Haggadah, so I thought we should learn something from the Haggadah about that. So that's number 2, and now we're going to go to the last one that I think I prepared for today. So you can take this one if that's not for... Okay, then
Back to Vayikra.
Back to
Sefer
Vayikra.
Vayikra.
Sefer Vayikra. Drush.
Parshat Tazria.
Yes. So this is another one that...
It's Drush.
It's a little, yeah, Drush, we'll do Drush.
We did Dalet.
So let's see here, we'll do,
You need one?
I wrote here number 2.
That's okay.
I'm questioning whether we should do number 2 or 3, or 2 or 3. Drush Bet or
Charles
Gimel.
would say we'll do
Beisul
both.
Gimel.
Yeah, well, Gimel is short and has a nice message, but it's a little, like the conversation is a little strange. I'll leave it at that. But Drush Bet is a more interesting, a little bit more interesting in terms of just the overall.
Now I have to read to myself. You know.
Yeah, I'm already looking at it now.
All right,
Yeah, I can see why he's
you see what I'm saying?
I like a strange conversation.
I mean, whatever we can talk about. Well, you know, the truth is, it's not such a big deal. It's fine. It's fine. We'll talk about it. We're all mature adults here. It's fine. Okay.
sometimes.
All right. Well, we'll do Jewish Gimel. It's short, and it's actually a very nice. It's nice. It's a nice thing overall. It's a nice message. Yeah, it's page 257 in the Art Scroll. Page
Nuntet.
Nun Tet in the regular one. I don't know what we call it. The Mivuar. Mivuar.
Pashkais.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. Anyway, so it says right. So it says Pashkis. No, Pashkis.
Pashkis.
Yeah, Pashkis. You know the Pashkis candy?
Oh yeah.
That's similar. I think it's the same family. Not sure if it's the same one, but a similar family.
Oodles.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, Parakama Danida, it says, Amar Rabbi Eli, my time of Rabbi Meir, the Amar Adam Me'akar v'nasech halav. We know that the Gemara says in Nasech Nida, it says that what is the reason, what is the source that Rabbi Meir says that blood, when in a woman's body, when blood turns into milk. Okay, that's what it says. Dichtiv mi yiten tahor v'mitameh lo echad.
That's a miracle.
It's a miracle. It is a miracle, by the way. It's an absolute miracle. Anyway, so it says mi yiten
But
tahor.
cows do too.
Right, yeah.
So it goes. So it's not a miracle anymore.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway, so he says the Drush is based on. By the way, the Drush it starts with a Gemara in Nida, and it's obviously talking about whether a nursing mother, that the blood of a nursing mother becomes milk, and therefore she's considered another. Therefore, she's unlikely to become a Nida. It's unlike this again. This is like a whole.
It's connected to the Parsha in terms of Tahara.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Now. Now we're going to take the Gemara takes this based on the idea that there is a machloket between whether or not she at one point does she become a nida? What does she can she not become? And then the Gemara kind of goes through a whole thing there. But one of the opinions, then that's the opinion that's not the opinion that we follow, is the one that Zera Shimshon is going to use to this whole idea. He takes it off on a tangent. It's not necessarily the main idea anyway. So he says like this, meaning that the main idea of the Gemara is not what he uses. Amar Rabbi Eli, what is the source for Rabbi Meir? What's the source? Who said that the blood, a woman's blood turns into the milk? It says in Iyov, it says, who can bring forth that which is tar from that which is tameh? It is not who else except for Hashem. Right? So he says, Rameir says that this is this is referring to the production of milk which is tahor from blood which is tameh. Rabbanan, what do they say? Amar Rabbi and Rabbanan. How do Rabbanan say it?
Blood is referred to as life.
Right.
That's when Chatamim is one of the worst.
Correct, but it's still considered tameh. In other words, the idea of the blood itself is considered tumah, right? So he says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Zoshich v'adzera shu tameh v'adam u'tzam mimenu tahor. So the Chachamim say that this is right. A person, shich v'adzera is considered a person he's considered himself tameh, right? But the person formed is what?
It's tahor.
Tahor, right? So therefore, in this verse, something tameh giving forth to something which is tahor that is by the birth of a child. Therefore, that is considered right from something which is tameh. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Elu Me'ad Nida, right? This is the paraduma water. Shamazeh Mezina Lav, right? As we know, what happens with the paraduma? The person who right? Mazeh Mazina Lav Tahor. That one who sprinkles the waters and the pond who become tahor. Vanogea, the person who touches the water become tameh, right? Ad Kaddish, that's the Gemara. Tzarich Chiyun, he says, so the Zera Shimshon analyzed the whole view of Rabbi Yochanan, that according to the Chachamim, right, is talking about the idea that the person is produced from a tameh source. Tzarich Chiyun la Rabbanan. What is so surprising about saying that a person is produced from something that is tameh should become tahor, right? He says this v'hai ilav da'atu rabbanan b'shmon asar davar, right? Why had the sages not said about the shmon asar dvarim? We're talking about that. That's a Mishnah in Shabbat. Talks about when the Chachamim went to visit Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Garon, and that they instituted 18 takanot, and one of them that was that the growth of truma had the status of truma, meaning something that comes out of truma has the same status as truma. That is, while according to law, according to midoraita, the growth is absolutely new and therefore it's chulin, therefore there's no problem. The Chachamim said that it should become truma as well, right? Although this is not relevant at all, it is relevant to all the truma. The Gemara explains that the intention was that if someone plants truma that is tameh, the growth should retain the tameh status. Meaning, what happens when I plant something? If I plant truma, a seed of truma, something that was a truma fruit, and I plant the seed, therefore what? The seed becomes has the level of kedusha of truma, and therefore what?
Well, when it gets contaminated, it becomes
right?
because it gets the water.
Exactly. So that's right. So exactly, the growth should remain. So what happens? So now my fruit that I've just planted the seed with truma, so that that should also have the same thing. Right. So now look what he says here. Wonderful thing. He says, "V'gazu truma trumea shenizra." He says, "Decree that a person, the produce that sprouted from tamei seeds. Let's say I have of truma. Let's say my truma seeds became tamei, right? So now they were planted. They in fact are, but midoraita hi Torah. They're tahor. So now the question is why? V'chein kol hatumot shenizru hayotzeh mehem tahor. All the produce after that." Right?
At the time of
so you're very close. So what's right? What Lomar mi ten tahor mi tamei al adam, to say that the verse that we just mentioned from Iyov is talking about the person. Im kol hatumot kachem, when all the tamei things are like that. So don't we know that shikvat zera is also planted? So here's what he answers. It's a wonderful answer. In in Psachim he mentions Atam shekol tumot kevan shenizru nida'aru bitumatan. Why does a tamei fruit? Why does a fruit, a seed that's of a something that becomes?
There you go.
Right, when I plant something, it becomes. I take a fruit that's truma at the level of truma, and then I plant the seed. It should in theory stay the same status. But it doesn't. Why?
Because it becomes from a grain to a seed.
What happens? What happens when a fruit? What happens when I plant a fruit? When I plant a seed, the first step of the planting the seed is it has to deconstruct, decomposes, and then it regrows. Right? So he says that happens, and that's why it's because, like you said, it's no longer. It doesn't have a status of a fruit anymore.
But the Torah's ochel.
What? Right, but exactly, it says here, Kvar Batlumi Torah Ta'ochav Nirkavu, right? They've lost their status as food because it rots away. And then only afterwards does it begin to sprout, right? Therefore the seeds attachments to the ground removes their status as food, and therefore what? It's no longer tummy, and therefore the fruit
that comes out
is now tahor, right?
Right.
Okay? So therefore the tummy seeds can therefore become what? Give forth tahor fruit, right? Because the seeds are
midoraita though.
Right, midoraita. Okay, again, like I said, this is like a whole. It's not okay. Now I said, but avisha inokain. He says, but a woman is not so because shazera kol oche no bekocho inokolet. If the zera doesn't have the power to really fertilize, what happens? It's lost its power, and then it's never going to do it. Right? But da'achar shlosha yamim shuv inokolet. At 3 days, basically, you have a small window of opportunity with human beings. Da'achar shlosha yamim shuv inokolet. Once it's become destroyed after 3 days, it's no longer good. That's it, right? In most cases, it becomes kolet miyad. Right?
It wasn't
the opposite. It's exact opposite of fruit, right? A person has a window of opportunity to become a fertilized egg only within 3 days. Once those 3 days are over, so what happens? It becomes a fertilized egg within the first 3 days, which are still becoming tameh. So he says, and that's why avlanu, right? So the hainu toch shlosh yamim, the achar shlosh yamim eno yachol od liklot, v'az hi Torah. Only then does it become tahor. V'imken hayalo la'adam liot tameh, and it should be that what a person should become tameh. Why? Because he was created from tumah, right? Lachen amar mi yiten tahor mi tameh, and that's why the Yov says, mi yiten, who can bring forth that which is tahor from what is tameh. The only thing is, it's a person, right, who was formed from tameh, right? Masha'en ken bazraim. That is not the case with plants. Shehem nifsadim kodem shiklutu. They lose their status, before they actually grow, become tahor. And while we generally think that a tameh seed is tahor, because what happens is in the ground it decomposes and therefore becomes tahor, right? Something that's tameh becomes tahor. Right, but unlike that, it's a human being, and because what happens, a human being, in order for it to become as a human being, it needs to remain tameh. It needs to remain tameh because that's the window of opportunity, and therefore we see that only Hashem can produce a tahor child for something that is.
Yes, but during the duration of pregnancy, the woman is not. She's tahor.
No, she is right. That's exactly what he's saying. That's exactly the point. The point is that we took something that we would think during those 3 days it's tameh.
Which 3 days?
Those first 3 days of when a zera can actually inception. Those 3 days are that's when the zera is considered tameh, and it turns into something tahor, which is not the case. Right, by creating a child. But that's the opposite is true with fruit. When something fruit, which is tameh.
Oh, I see. Truma.
Right.
I see.
So
why is that?
That's the halacha.
That's how Hashem created.
Yeah. Anyways, Baruch Adonai Le'olam Amen v'Amen.
Good.
Baruch Hashem. Yes.
Sure.
I think you need a drink.
What's the drink?
Please.